Title: Inside Rikers Island is America's most violent jail. Help this channel grow. Like the video, leave a comment, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on your notifications for our next real-life prison stories. This helps us a lot. Thank you. The story begins. That is the word former detainees use again and again when they describe their first nights inside Rikers Island. Not confusion. Not fear. Chaos. Because in an environment where hundreds of people live in close quarters, even the smallest spark can ignite something bigger. A simple argument. A misunderstanding. A look taken the wrong way. Inside crowded housing units, moments like these can escalate faster than anyone expects. And when they do, the consequences can spread through an entire dorm within seconds. Former detainees have described how tensions sometimes build quietly throughout the day. Voices getting louder. Groups forming in corners of the housing unit. Correction officers watching carefully, trying to anticipate problems before they explode. But prediction is never perfect. And when conflicts do break out, the response can be chaotic. Officers rush to separate the people involved. Other detainees are ordered to move back. Alarms echo down the corridors. Doors slam shut. And the entire housing unit suddenly becomes tense and silent. But even after incidents are resolved, the atmosphere rarely returns to calm immediately. Inside Rikers Island, many detainees are dealing with stress that extends far beyond the walls of the jail. Some are waiting for court dates that could determine their future. Others are struggling with the uncertainty of not knowing how long they will remain behind bars. 4 people awaiting trial. Every day inside the facility can feel like a countdown without a clear ending. And that uncertainty can make an already volatile environment even more unpredictable. Because unlike long-term prisons, jails like Rikers Island operate on constant movement. New detainees arrive every day. Others leave after bail hearings or court decisions. Housing assignments change. Units are reorganized. And the population inside the facility is always shifting. This constant turnover creates challenges for everyone inside the system. Correction officers must learn new faces quickly. Detainees must adapt to new living arrangements. And administrators must manage the complex logistics of housing thousands of people while trying to maintain safety. But critics argue that the challenges at Rikers Island go far beyond the normal difficulties of running a large detention facility. Over the years, reports from journalists, oversight agencies, and advocacy groups have repeatedly raised questions about whether the system itself has been overwhelmed. Staffing shortages have often been cited as a major factor. When there are fewer officers on duty than planned, supervision becomes more difficult. Housing units may have fewer staff members available to monitor activity. Response times to emergencies can become slower. And the pressure on the officers who remain on duty increases significantly. Former staff members have described shifts where the workload became overwhelming, monitoring dozens, or sometimes hundreds, of detainees at once. Responding to incidents in one housing area while trying to keep order in another. Balancing safety concerns with the daily routines of the facility. For many officers, the job can be physically and emotionally demanding. Long shifts, high stress, and the constant responsibility of maintaining control in an environment where tensions can rise quickly. But correction officers are not the only people under pressure inside Rikers Island. Detainees also face daily challenges adapting to life inside the facility. Daily schedules are tightly structured. Meals are served at specific times. Movement between housing areas is carefully controlled. Court transports begin early in the morning. And recreation periods are limited. For some detainees, these routines provide a sense of structure during an uncertain time. For others, the restrictions create frustration and tension. And in a place where hundreds of individuals are confined together, those emotions can quickly affect the entire environment. Yet despite the challenges, life inside Rikers Island continues to follow a rhythm. Morning counts, meal service, medical visits, legal consultations, court transports. Each day follows a pattern designed to keep the system functioning. But beneath that routine lies a deeper question that has troubled policymakers and investigators for years. Why has it been so difficult to stabilize conditions inside the facility? Part of the answer may lie in the size and complexity of the operation itself. Rikers Island is not just one building. It is a network of detention facilities spread across the island, each designed to house different populations. Managing this network requires coordination between administrators, officers, medical staff, transportation units, and legal authorities across New York City. Every day, detainees must be transported to courthouses throughout the city. Medical teams must respond to health concerns. Security teams must monitor activity across multiple housing areas. And administrators must track thousands of individual cases moving through the justice system. The scale of the operation makes even small problems difficult to solve quickly. A staffing shortage in one unit can affect another. Transportation delays can disrupt court schedules. And when incidents occur, they often trigger reviews and investigations that take months, or even years, to complete. Yet despite all of these complications, critics argue that the deeper issue may be structural. Some experts believe the design of the facility itself contributes to the challenges inside. Large housing units. A remote island location. A population constantly rotating in and out of custody. All of these factors create conditions that can be difficult to manage effectively. And as more reports surfaced over the years, pressure began building outside the island as well. Advocacy groups demanded reforms. Lawmakers called for investigations. Families of detainees raised concerns about safety. And journalists continued documenting stories from inside the jail complex. Slowly, the conversation surrounding Rikers Island began to change. At first, the focus was on reform. Improving staffing. Strengthening oversight. Upgrading facilities. But as time passed, some policymakers began asking a far more radical question. What if reform wasn't enough? What if the problems at Rikers Island were too deeply rooted to fix with incremental changes? What if the only real solution was to close the facility entirely? That idea once seemed unthinkable. Rikers Island had been part of New York City's justice system for generations. Thousands of detainees passed through the complex every year. Closing it would require completely redesigning how the city manages detention. Yet as investigations continued and public scrutiny increased, the possibility of shutting down the facility began. For decades, stories about violence inside Rikers Island circulated quietly through courtrooms, news reports, and the testimonies of former detainees. But in the last 2 decades, the situation began attracting national attention. Investigations started revealing patterns that were difficult to ignore. Assaults, staff shortages, overcrowded housing units, and a system struggling to maintain control. At the center of this growing crisis was the agency responsible for operating the facility, the New York City Department of Correction. The department oversees multiple jail facilities across the island, managing thousands of detainees each year. But maintaining order inside such a large complex has never been simple. Unlike long-term prisons, Rikers Island primarily houses people who are awaiting trial or serving shorter sentences. That means the population constantly changes. Every week, new detainees arrive. Others leave after court hearings. And many enter the system already under extreme stress. The result is a highly volatile environment. Former correction officers have described shifts where housing areas filled with tension long before conflicts erupted. Arguments over small issues, phones, food trays, seating arrangements, could escalate rapidly. When staffing levels dropped, supervision became even more difficult. In some cases, entire housing units had far fewer officers than recommended safety levels. And when there are fewer staff members watching hundreds of detainees, control can deteriorate quickly. One of the most widely cited investigations into conditions at Rikers Island came from the United States Department of Justice. Federal investigators examined reports of violence within certain housing areas and identified troubling patterns. According to the findings, incidents involving excessive force and unsafe conditions were occurring more frequently than expected. Investigators concluded that systemic problems, including inadequate supervision and flawed management practices, played a role. These conclusions intensified public scrutiny. Media outlets began reporting on specific incidents inside the jail complex. Former detainees described nights filled with constant alarms, fights erupting between rival groups, and officers rushing between housing areas to regain control. But perhaps the most alarming revelations involved younger detainees who had been housed in sections of the jail in previous years. Reports described situations where younger inmates faced high risks of violence. These cases sparked national debates about how juvenile and young adult detainees should be treated inside jail systems. Civil rights organizations, including the American Civil Liberties Union, began pushing for reforms. They argued that systemic changes were necessary to address safety concerns inside the facility. Meanwhile, correction officers faced their own challenges. Working conditions inside the jail became increasingly difficult as staffing shortages worsened. In some situations, officers reported being assigned to multiple housing areas at once. Others described extended overtime shifts that left staff exhausted. As tensions grew inside the facility, the strain on both detainees and staff became more visible. But violence inside Rikers Island doesn't always look like dramatic prison movie scenes. Sometimes it begins with smaller incidents. A disagreement during recreation time. A dispute over access to phones. A misunderstanding between detainees from different neighborhoods or affiliations. Inside crowded housing units, these small sparks can spread quickly. When officers respond to fights, they must separate participants, secure the area, and restore order before tensions escalate further. But when staffing levels are low, those responses become harder to coordinate. Over time, the combination of overcrowding, understaffing, and rising tensions created a cycle that proved difficult to break. Each incident increased pressure on the system. Each investigation added more scrutiny. And each report raised the same question again. Why were these problems continuing? One answer lies in the complex structure of the New York City jail system itself. Unlike many prisons located far from major cities, Rikers Island operates within one of the largest urban populations in the United States. Thousands of people pass through the city's criminal justice system every year. Courts process large caseloads. Arrests fluctuate depending on policing policies. And detention facilities must accommodate the constant flow of detainees moving through the system. All of this creates logistical challenges. Housing assignments must be carefully managed to separate individuals who may have conflicts. Medical services must operate around the clock. Transportation units must move detainees to and from court appearances across the city. And every day, officers must maintain order within a complex that functions almost like a small city of its own. Yet despite these challenges, critics argue that deeper systemic problems also contributed to the crisis. Leadership changes, budget constraints, and policy decisions made over many years, all shaping the environment inside the jail. By the late 2010s, calls for major reform were growing louder. City officials faced increasing pressure to address the situation. Advocates demanded safer conditions. Correction officers' unions warned about dangerous staffing shortages. And community groups called for fundamental changes to how the jail system operates. But the debate soon expanded into something even bigger. Some policymakers began asking a radical question. What if the problem wasn't just how Rikers Island was run? What if the problem was the jail itself? What if the entire complex needed to be closed? For decades the idea seemed impossible. Rikers Island had been operating since the early 20th century. It was deeply embedded in New York City's criminal justice infrastructure. Closing it would require replacing the entire system with something new. But as more reports surfaced and pressure mounted, the conversation shifted from reform to something much more dramatic. A plan to shut down the jail complex completely. And in the final chapter we'll explore how that plan emerged, and what it means for the future of one of the most infamous jails in America. Years of investigative reports. Journalists, legal advocates, and oversight officials spent decades documenting systemic problems inside the facility. Some reports focused on violence between detainees. Others raised questions about management, staffing shortages, and the ability of the jail system to safely supervise such a large population. These concerns gradually reached a wider audience. What was once discussed mainly among lawyers and correction officials began appearing in major news coverage and public hearings. Testimonies from former detainees and staff members added to the growing debate over whether the system could continue operating the same way. One major turning point came when investigators from the United States Department of Justice examined conditions inside parts of the jail complex. Their findings drew national attention. According to investigators, patterns of violence and the use of force raised serious concerns about safety within certain housing units. The investigation did not only focus on individual incidents. It examined how the system functioned overall, how officers were trained, how incidents were reported, and how supervision worked inside crowded dormitories. These conclusions intensified calls for reform. Advocacy groups argued that the problems inside Rikers Island reflected deeper structural issues within the jail system. They pointed to overcrowding in previous decades, high staff turnover, and a detention population that included many individuals who had not yet been convicted of a crime. Because Rikers Island is primarily a jail, not a long-term prison, many of the people held there are awaiting trial. Some remain in custody because they cannot afford bail. Others are waiting for court proceedings to move forward. This creates a unique environment compared with traditional prisons. The population changes constantly. New detainees arrive every day. Others leave after court hearings or bail decisions. Housing assignments shift regularly, and officers must manage an environment where tensions can escalate quickly. For city leaders, these realities presented a major challenge. The jail complex had been operating for generations, and many parts of New York City's detention system were built around it. Transportation systems moved detainees to courthouses across the city, while medical units and administrative staff managed thousands of cases each year. Replacing the facility would mean redesigning a large part of the city's justice infrastructure. But as criticism grew, the conversation began to shift. Instead of asking how to fix Rikers Island, some officials started asking whether the facility should exist at all. Supporters of closure argued that the jail's remote island location created additional problems. Travel to the facility could be difficult for families, attorneys, and oversight groups. Daily transportation of detainees to court also created logistical challenges. Advocates believed that smaller detention facilities located closer to courthouses could solve some of these issues. Detainees would be closer to their legal representation. Families could visit more easily, and administrators might find it easier to manage smaller populations. However, the proposal quickly became controversial. Building new detention centers inside New York City neighborhoods raised concerns among residents. Some communities opposed the idea of large jail facilities being constructed nearby, arguing that they could affect safety and property values. Public meetings often became heated as officials attempted to balance community concerns with broader criminal justice reform efforts. At the same time, the debate around Rikers Island became part of a larger national conversation about criminal justice policy. Cities across the United States were examining how their jail systems operated. Questions about bail practices, pretrial detention, and jail conditions were being discussed in legislatures and courtrooms across the country. Rikers Island became one of the most visible examples in that debate. Meanwhile, daily operations inside the facility continued. Correction officers reported for duty. Court transports left the island early each morning. Medical teams treated detainees. And individuals awaiting trial continued navigating an uncertain legal process. Life inside the complex moved forward even as policymakers debated its long-term future. Eventually, city officials approved a plan to close the island facility and replace it with borough-based detention centers located in Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and the Bronx. The proposal represented one of the largest structural changes to New York City's jail system in decades. Supporters believed the new approach could create safer and more manageable facilities. But implementing the plan would take years. Designing and constructing secure detention centers requires extensive planning, funding, and community review. Each project must meet strict safety requirements while also addressing the concerns of local residents. At the same time, policy changes affecting bail and pretrial detention began reducing the number of people held in jail before trial. Supporters of these reforms argued that fewer people should remain incarcerated while waiting for court proceedings. These changes became an important part of the broader effort to reduce the city's jail population. Despite these efforts, predicting the future of the detention system remains difficult. Crime rates fluctuate. Court backlogs change. And policy decisions can alter how many people enter the jail system each year. For that reason, the future of Rikers Island remains closely tied to larger debates about criminal justice policy in New York City. Even today, the jail complex still stands in the East River, visible from planes approaching nearby airports and bridges connecting parts of the city. Its buildings remain a reminder of a system that has been under scrutiny for decades. Whether the island facility eventually closes as planned, or continues operating longer than expected, its legacy will remain deeply connected to the history of New York City's criminal justice system. Because the story of Rikers Island is not only about one jail. It is about the ongoing challenge of creating a system that balances justice, safety, and humane treatment for everyone involved.